Hi friends, welcome to another episode from the Born to Excel series of success motivation programs. Today we shall understand what is the role of listening and the need for developing the art of listening. Before that, may I take this opportunity to wish and thank every listener, every viewer who has sent me emails and called me on telephone in Dubai about the previous 4 episodes. Thank you very much, and your encouragement is greatly valued. When we talk about developing the art of listening, we look back to our educational years, and you have spent quite a few years already in the school. Many years you have spent trying to understand how to read, how to write, how to speak, etc. Have you ever had any class in helping you to be a better listener, better observer, and better perceiver? If not, let's begin from the words of Ralph Nichols, who said, "The most basic human need is the desire to be understood and to understand." Yes, it is one of the most fundamental desires of every one of us, that we be understood by people around us and we understand them too. Very often, you have said something to a friend of yours or a relation of yours. What you meant was so different from what they understood and came back to you. The great writer, speaker, Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Habits of Successful and Effective People, he wrote, as one of the successful habits is, first try to understand, then try to be understood. His principle of win-win. In other words, whenever we communicate, make sure the other person is able to understand us and make him sure that we are paying attention to what we are telling him or what he is telling us. In fact, research has shown that most of our learning is done from 80% of our learning activity and listening activity, and rest of the time that we spend in listening goes almost wasted. Listening is something that one develops in the early childhood. And where do we actually develop it? From role model parents primarily. If you are lucky to be growing in a family where parents are communicating with you more than telling and talking to you, if they are asking you questions and allowing you to answer, if you are in the company of parents who are listening to you frequently to what you have to tell them, you also develop a habit of listening to what they have to tell us. This message is also for parents who are listening. Examine ourselves. Are we good listeners to what our children are telling us? Are we good listeners to friends who come to visit us? Or are we good listeners when people tell us or convey a message to us? And you teenagers listening to me, ask yourself, are you a good listener? Or are you a casual listener? And if the answer is, why are you a casual listener? And you will get the answer inside. One of the best ways to become a better listener in your life is this fundamental simple principle I advocate to every adult, every teenager who comes to my training. Learn to listen to yourself. If we learn to listen to ourselves and our inner promptings about everything we have a doubt about, everything we need counseling, we also become better listeners to people who have something to convey to us. And where do we begin and how do we begin that listening to ourselves habit? Take 2 minutes of your valuable time in a day before going to bed. Sit down, analyze, ask yourself, what have you done? Go through the conversations that you are listening to. Go through the class that you attended, one after another. Replay the video cassette of your day's activity and watch yourself. And in fact, One way to analyze whether we are good listeners is if the school has an opportunity to videotape the entire class, and if you are lucky to have yourself focused for a whole period on you, and if you are able to see yourself the way you listen in a class, you will learn a lot about your listening habits. And we will realize that we go easily distracted when other people are talking to us. In fact, very often when we are being talked to, when people are communicating with us, we are preparing our reply to them rather than listening to what they are trying to tell us. Am I right? And that's where the weakness of listening is all about. How to develop it. If you observe people who are always chatting like chatterbox and talking, the talkers are people who are trying to impress other people. They want them to be remembered by other people. They want their ideas to be remembered by other people. But listeners are people make the speaker feel important and make the listener feel they are worth. In fact, there was a famous story of a very famous lady who had once a conversation with a great politician on the one hand, and she had a conversation with a wise, humble person on the other hand. When an interviewer asked this lady, how did the meetings go with these two gentlemen? And the lady replied, the great leader politician made me feel that he was great. The gentleman whom I had a meeting second time made me feel I was great. And that's the difference between talkers and listeners. Listeners make those who are communicating with them, make them feel important. And that is shown by our body image, our posture, our eye contact, our making sounds like yes, I understand, yes, go on, is that what you mean? Rephrase and paraphrase and say, I didn't quite understand, may I narrate to you what I have understood, and do let me know whether I have understood correctly. These are symptoms of good listening. Listening is an art. It is best installed by parents in children. Parents who keep on talking, advising and correcting will always produce talkative children and not children who are listeners. A story about listening, how we can be partially deaf or totally deaf when people are talking to us. There was a man in a village who was so good at playing his violin. His music was so powerful, I could put hungry lions to sleep. The king heard about his skill in music and he invited him to his palace and asked him, hey, I understand that you play music so beautifully well that even hungry lions do not jump at you, they sleep, listen to your music. The man said, yes, sir. And the king asked, would you give me a demonstration in our zoo one of these days? He said, of course, anytime. The gentleman came well dressed like a real professional musician, and the king had ordered lots of people, ministers and attendants to come and see the skill of this man. The king was shrewd enough to tell the zookeeper not to feed the 3 lions in the zoo for the next 6 days. On the 7th day, the performance time came. The gentleman played his violin and went inside the cage of one of the lions. That lion sat quietly without jumping at the man. He went out playing the music and went into the second cage. There too, that animal sat quietly and did not jump at him. But unfortunately, when he went into the third cage, that lion jumped at him and ate him up instantly and killed him. Can you guess what really happened in the third cage? Yes, my friends, they found out later that animal was totally deaf. Aren't we very often deaf when people are telling something that we are not happy to listen? And very often, those are the things we ought to listen if we want to live well, love well, learn well, labor well, and leave a legacy in this world. I am quoting from Stephen Covey. All the goals of our life, listening is one of the best ways to fulfill our goals. If we listen to parents in the early childhood, if we listen to good friends as we grow, if we listen to good teachers and guides as we grow, if we listen to our professional guides into the professional area, we were able to make a good living, good loving in the family circle, in corporate circle, and in social circle, and in personal lives too. Good listeners make good parents. Good listeners make good husbands and wives. Good listeners make good managers and colleagues. Good listeners make good friends. And that's one art very often we are not trained in at all. And when we talk about the totally deaf animal that killed the musician, partially deaf people like us, when parents tell something about the homework, a teenager remains half deaf. When the parent talks about party or music or cinema or film, etc., the teenager is fully attentive and listening. We understand. But the key factor is learning to pay attention and listen to what matters. Develop this skill and be a successful person in life. So learn to listen. Good listener is one who is able to rephrase, paraphrase, and repeat what he heard without losing meaning, but without using the same words. I repeat, a good listener is someone who listens to a lecture and is able to give a class after that in his own words, in his own style, without losing the content of the lecture or what he heard. That's good listening. Whereas anyone who hears and repeats exactly what he heard is a good parrot and not a good listener probably. Could be a good listener too. But parroting is very different from listening. Effective listeners very often become very effective communicators because after getting in the habit of listening, listeners very often spend about 70% of their time listening and only 30% they speak of the time. Whereas talkers talk about 70% of the time and listen only 30% of the time. Listeners over a period of time become such successful, effective communicators because the one who communicates with them does not give up on them, because the communicator is happy to continue with a good listener. A communicator stops communicating with a poor listener. Are you a good listener? If you want to be a successful professional in the world of work tomorrow, be a good listener. And if you want to be a good manager, be a good listener. And listening is not only from your ears, my friends. Listening is also focusing our attention on what we see. Listening is also sharpening all our senses, our sense of touch on anything that we have to get a shape felt. For example, listening can be done by all the 5 senses. For example, a little child who is learning the concept of apple. There are many ways to learn the concept of apple. The concept that I learned was with a little red round fruit with the name A-P-P-L-E written on the top. And the teacher pronounced as A-P-P-L-E, apple. That's how I learned when I was 12 years age. But later, I went to a nursery school where I saw a teacher had brought a red apple, a green apple, an yellow apple, all 3 ripe and ready. She passed it around for the children to touch and feel and smell, and then kept on reciting a rhyme with the word apple appearing in it many times. She showed a book with the pictures of apples of various shades and colors, because all 3 apples, green, yellow and red, she told, come in ripe form. And finally she had a piece cut and given to each child and made them pronounce the word apple. So in other words, all the 5 senses, the eyes, the touch, the smell and the taste, put in the listening effect into the registration of the image of the word apple. And the more senses we use when we listen, the better listeners we become. When we are attentive and eager to get the content of what somebody is communicating to us, we are good listeners. Researchers show that about 85% of our learning comes from effective learning. In fact, many high school students, and I was really one of them after the age of 12, I really did not do much reading and writing at home. I paid very close attention to every class, and I made whatever little notes I could, and I did my homework the same evening. And of course, I got up very early in the morning to revise and study again. And listening in the class was the key factor. And those boys and girls who have got well above average intelligence, I appeal to you, if you attentively listen to a class and make your notes in a pattern that I taught you, pictorial notes in picture form and learning map form, you will be able to complete all your learning by the end of the day by revising it with the homework once. After that, you only need to look at once in a while the notes in order to get through. Effective students finish most of their studying in the classroom. They often revise just once at home during the homework, and that's enough for sharp children who are attentive. Research also tells us 75% of the time we are distracted in the classroom or in a lecture session, and sometimes even in prayer sessions people get very easily distracted. Research also shows that less than 25% of people ever had any formal training in attentive listening and paying attention to the content and the context of what they are supposed to listen. Let us understand the modes of listening. There are 3 modes of listening, patterns. One is called the combative listening, fighting for getting a chance to reply, preparing your reply even while you are listening. Instead of listening attentively, taking in the information, pondering and reflecting, you are already preparing a speech called combative or competitive listening. The next listening is passive listening. Like you go for a counseling session, you respect the counselor so much, whatever he or she says, you attentively, passively, without any interaction, without any analysis, without any clarification seeking, you keep on listening. That is passive listening. The ideal form of listening that we ought to learn is active, reflective listening. That is, pay attention to what is being said, pay attention to the gesture, posture, body language, and think about what you are hearing. Analyze what I hear, what is the significance, where does it get applied to, how useful this information is there any way I can improve on what I am hearing? If you are keeping on thinking about what you hear, you are listening. And if you listen with the intention of teaching someone else what you are learning, you will be a very attentive listener. For example, sometimes when we get training programs for corporate bodies, sometimes they ask us a topic that is related to our area but relatively new. And those hours when I read or see a CD or a reference material from the email, from the internet, the attention with which I read and focus is so much sharper. One time reading, one time listening is enough to get all the key elements that I need for the lecture session that I am planning. So my friends, you go to the classroom. Imagine you are going to teach a group of your classmates. And this was experimented in the university where I studied. We had 24 students. We divided the job responsibility of learning and researching each topic the professors taught. And what we did, each one would take one topic of the day and would do all the research and reading from library and compile the perfect note and have photocopies made for all of us. And if you have got that kind of responsibility, my friends, all your class members can become very good, successful students. And a very good listening habit was shown by an example that we could pay attention to. In Olympics, there is a special function called Paralympics for mentally and physically retarded people. In Seattle Olympics many years ago, there was a very listening, attentive Olympian in that group. 9 of them came for a race for 200-meter dash, and they were lined up for the race. Thousands of people are watching them in the arena, and several millions watching them on television channels. When the gun was fired, they all ran for the gold medal and the glory and the money that is attached to it. One of them was so fast, he was sure to get the gold medal 3/4 of the race, and he heard the sound. He not only heard, he listened to the crying voice of someone who had fallen and hurt himself. Instead of running towards that gold medal, my friends, his inner listening voice told, do something. He looks back and stops running and comes back to pick up that competitor who had fallen down. Looking at his behavior, all the others who were trailing behind, they also stopped running and came together. They picked up this man. Effect of good, sincere, heartfelt listening. And what does this man tell all the others? 4 of you hold the hands on this side, we 4 will hold hand on this side. And they hold hands together, 9 of them. Competitors a few seconds ago, now helping each other. And they all run together to the finish line. By gesture he tells, wait. And then all of them put their right legs together with his guidance. And the Olympic Committee had to produce, I understand, 9 gold medals for one event. My friends, if you are willing to listen to the plight of your classmates, especially those bright ones among you, I appeal to you, listen to the cry of those who are struggling. If you are able to help them also to succeed in life. If you are a good listener, you will build lifetime friends. Those people will never take the bread out of your mouth, never pull the carpet from below you. You will have a lifetime friends. Learn to listen. Avoid daydreaming in the class. Many teenagers lose a lot of time daydreaming. My friends, in one of the episodes I had told you the story of a man who was on the Niagara River in his boat daydreaming. And when he daydreamed too long, he was too close to the Niagara Fall and went down with his boat and died. Do not let this boat of life go down the stream because of the daydreaming. Pay attention and build the foundation of listening at the early stage. When you listen, make sure you are motivated to listen. And as I told in one of my other sessions, if you boys and girls are not motivated enough to learn and listen, I appeal to you, feel what hunger can be. Skip 2 meals one day. Feel the pang of hunger one day when you are still young, when fathers and mothers are feeding, just in order to wake you up. That one day, if you are ill-prepared, if you are unprepared to earn a living, what hunger might be like. In the competitive world out there, nobody is waiting there with a business opportunity or a job for you. You better listen and get ready to listen more and be ready to start a good life. Listen for ideas. There is an abbreviation or an acronym, LISAN, L-I-S-A-N. L for lead. Look ahead what is likely to come when you are listening. Anticipate. Then look for ideas, ideas. Look for signals, key elements. Then be active in listening. And make notes. Listen means take notes. Take notes that are appropriate to your style, preferably visual notes that will comprise all key elements on one single sheet of paper, which we call mind mapping. Before going to class, I appeal to you, if you want to be a good listener, go with an open mind to listen and glance through the book, headline, sub-headline, skim through the key elements before the lecture session. And be ready to understand, ask questions. And if you do not understand, always raise the hand with confidence and ask questions. During listening, be consistent about your abbreviations and note making. Pay attention to the verbal cues and be ready to ask questions during the listening. After listening, please complete your notes, do some research of reading material, and complete your activity of the day with homework at the same time. Learn the art of listening. You will live better. You will have very good friendly people who will be happy to be around with you. You will have plenty of love from people around you, your friends in life, your parents, your partners in life later. All of them will be happy because you are a good listener. You will also be a good learner through life. You will also leave a good legacy and will labor conscientiously. Wish you all the best. Develop the art of listening and be a winner in the world.